Alchemy and theurgy can both be understood as practices of transformation, and both practices culminate in the realization that the human self and the cosmos itself are both but two expressions of the same reality. We've heard of this, of course, a million times, so much so that it's become a cliché. But we must always struggle against the way concepts make experiences banal. This is not about knowing something in an intellectual sense, but a literal transformation that reshapes the way we experience the world. In the temple of Serapis in Delos, we have evidence of votive offerings that were molded in the shape of human eyes, made out of both silver and gold. Scholars have interpreted these offerings strictly from a materialist perspective, where these were made by patients in thanks, mirroring the body parts that were medically treated in the healing complex. But I believe there is an alternate reading, for in temples of Asclepius, the god is not only considered a physician and healer, but a god of morality, who teaches those who come into his temples how to live the philosophic, and therefore the moral life. To my mind, these golden and silver eyes are material expressions of a transformation of vision and a mind that has been purified in both its moral and philosophical approach to life. The 20th century Indologist Heinrich Zimmer narrated an ancient Hindu legend called The King and the Corpse, which is also found in certain Dravidian languages. It is a story that I've been familiar with for some time now, and it has always intrigued me greatly. Considering the scope of my previous videos, I hadn't yet found a place where I could incorporate it into my writing. I will not be analyzing this legend in any detail, because frankly, I believe these stories serve best as integrated wholes, or vessels that penetrate the curious mind and unfold like a flower within the inner being. Cold analysis is often a hindrance to actual spiritual transformation. But at least let me briefly set the stage. The main character is a Hindu hero king named Vikramaditya, meaning the son of valor, who lived around 50 BC. And it is his journey that we will follow. Like all spiritual paths, or like alchemy and theurgy, the journey begins first by noticing. Noticing that something valuable or curious lays hidden behind appearances. Following this impulse to uncover and discover will bring the initiate into contact with the dead, a place full of memories, past events, guilt, life unfulfilled and squandered. This is your corpse, whom you must carry on your back. The dead hold the key to hidden knowledge that must be resolved in the present. A bridge is to be developed between you and this wraith that inhabits the corpse. But this underworld journey is simultaneously an engagement with the world as it is, in all its paradoxes and contradictions. You must use your inner wisdom and cunning, or mythos, to determine the through line between opposites, and to confront the enigmas of life. Once discovered, its potent power, if kept to yourself and unrevealed and undisclosed to your other, darker companion, will cause your head to explode, for such energy and power is stored in these realizations. After the trials, the king is granted a vision of Shiva, Lord of the universe, who, quote, appeared in glory, attended by a multitude of gods. Such is the bare outline of this story. So enough of my commentary. Let us immerse ourselves in this story and let its pictures dance upon our imagination and its jewels of wisdom illuminate our intellect. The King and the Corpse. It was remarkable the way the king became involved in the adventure. For 10 years, every day, there had been appearing in his audience chamber, where he sat in state, hearing petitions and dispensing justice, a holy man in the robe of a beggar ascetic, who without a word would offer him a fruit. And the royal personage would accept the trifling present, passing it along without an afterthought to his treasurer standing behind the throne. Without making any request, the mendicant would then withdraw and vanish into the crowd of petitioners, having betrayed no sign either of disappointment or of impatience. Then it happened one day, some 10 years after the first appearance of the holy man, that a tame monkey, having escaped from the women's apartments in the inner palace, came bounding into the hall and leaped upon the arm of the throne. The mendicant had just presented his gift, and the king playfully handed it over to the monkey. When the animal bit into it, a valuable jewel dropped out and rolled across the floor. The king's eyes grew wide. He turned with dignity to the treasurer at his shoulder. "What has become of all the others?" he asked. But the treasurer was unable to say. He had been tossing the unimpressive gifts through an upper trellised window into the treasure house, not even bothering to unlock the door. And so he excused himself and hurried to the vault. Opening it, he made his way to the part beneath the little window. There on the floor lay a mass of rotten fruit in various stages of decay, and amidst this debris of many years, a heap of priceless gems. The king was pleased, and he bestowed the entire heap upon the treasurer. Of a generous spirit, he was not avid for riches, yet his curiosity was aroused. Therefore, when the ascetic next morning presented himself, tendering in silence his apparently modest offering, the king refused to accept it unless he would pause a while and speak. The holy man stated that he wished an interview in private. The king granted the desire, and the mendicant at last presented his request. What he required, he told the king, was the help of a hero, a truly intrepid man to assist in an enterprise of magic. The king was interested in hearing more. The weapons of true heroes, the magician explained, are renowned in the annals of magic for their peculiar exorcising powers. The king permitted his petitioner to continue. The stranger thereupon invited him to come, on the night of the next new moon, to the great funeral ground, where the dead of the city were cremated and the criminals hanged. The king, undaunted, gave assent, and the ascetic, who bore the appropriate name of Rich in Patience, took his leave. The appointed night arrived, the night of the next new moon. The king, alone, girded on his sword, wrapped himself in a dark mantle, and with muffled countenance set forth on the questionable adventure. As he approached the dreadful burial ground, he became increasingly aware of the tumult of the specters and demons hovering about the uncanny place, feasting upon the dead and celebrating their horrible carousals. Fearlessly he continued. When he crossed into the burning area by the light of the still smoldering funeral pyres, his alert eyes half discerned, half guessed, the charred scattering of the blackened skeletons and skulls. His ears throbbed to the hideous uproar of the ghouls. He proceeded to the rendezvous, and there was his sorcerer, intently drawing a magic circle on the ground. "Here I am," the king said. "What can I do for you?" The other hardly lifted his eyes. "Go to the other end of the burning ground," he said, "and you will find the corpse of a hanged man dangling from a tree. Cut it down and bring it here." The king turned, and crossing again the extensive area, came to a giant tree. The moonless night was illuminated only by the dim flickering of the exhausted pyres. The goblins made an inhuman din. Yet he was unafraid, and, perceiving the hanged man dangling there, he ascended the tree and cut the rope with his sword. When the corpse fell, it gave a moan, as though it had been hurt. The king, thinking there must still be life in it, began to grope over the rigid form. A shrill laugh broke from its throat, and the king realized that the body was inhabited by a ghost. "What are you laughing at?" he demanded. The instant he spoke, the corpse flew back to the limb of the tree. The king ascended and again cut the body down. He lifted it without a word this time, placed it on his shoulder, and began to walk. But he had not taken many steps when the voice in the corpse began to speak. "O king, let me shorten the way for you with a tale," it said. The king did not reply, and so the spirit told its story. There was once upon a time a certain prince who went on a hunting party with a young friend. The friend was the son of the chancellor of the prince's father, and losing touch with their companions, they strolled aimlessly through the forest, until they arrived at a pleasant lake, where they paused to rest. The prince saw a beautiful maiden bathing on the farther bank, who, unobserved by her companions, was already making signals to him across the water. He was unable to understand the signs, but the chancellor's son was catching their meaning very well. She had communicated her name, that of her family, and that of the kingdom in which she lived, and was announcing her love. When she turned and vanished into the foliage, the two youths at last got up and ambled home. Another day, under the pretext of another hunting party, the two friends set off again into the jungle, detached themselves, and went to the town in which the girl lived. They found lodging in the house of an old woman, whom they bribed to serve as messenger. The girl was so cunning that she was able to formulate a reply which the old woman did not recognize as the arrangement of a rendezvous. The signals were deciphered by the clever son of the chancellor. Then, for lunar reasons, the rendezvous had to be postponed, and the girl described, again by signals, how the prince might climb into her father's garden and ascend to her lofty chamber. He entered as arranged, through her window, and the two young lovers found delight in each other's arms. The girl was both passionate and cunning. When she learned that her signals had been deciphered not by the prince but by his friend, she was immediately afraid that her affair would be betrayed, and so she determined to poison the interpreter. He, however, was her match, and had even foreseen that this would come to pass. He had devised a plan that would teach her, once and for all, that he knew how to take care both of himself and of his prince. The young man disguised himself as a beggar ascetic, persuaded the prince to play the role of the ascetic's pupil, and then, by a clever stratagem, brought the girl into suspicion as a witch. He convinced the king of the country that she had been the cause of the recent sudden death of his infant son, and he produced such proof that she was condemned to a disgraceful death. Exposed naked outside of the town, she was left prey to the beasts of the surrounding jungle. But the moment she was abandoned, the two young men, having procured swift horses for themselves, snatched her up and fled with her to the prince's realm, where she became his bride and future queen. Grief over the disgrace and loss overcame the aged parents of the maid. Their hearts broke and they died. Now who was guilty of the death of those two? Suddenly demanded the spectre in the corpse. If you know the answer and do not reply, your head will burst into 100 pieces. The king believed that he knew the answer, but suspected that if he uttered a word, the corpse would go flying back to the tree. Nevertheless, he did not wish his head to explode. Neither the maid nor the prince was guilty, he said, because they were inflamed by the arrows of love. Nor was the son of the chancellor guilty, for he was not acting upon his own responsibility, but in the service of his master. The only one guilty was the king of that country, who let such things come to pass within his realm. He did not see through the subtle trick played on the natural grief that he felt for his infant son. He failed to note that the mane of the beggar ascetic was no more than a disguise. He had never taken cognizance of the activities of the two strangers in his capital. He was not even aware that they were there. Therefore he is to be judged guilty of failure in his kingly duty, which was to be the all-seeing eye of his kingdom, the all-knowing protector and governor of his folk. When the last word of the judgment had left the speaker's tongue, the burden, groaning in mock agony, vanished from his back, and he knew that it was hanging again from the arm of the tree. He returned, cut the corpse down, shouldered the load, and tried again. "My dear sir," said the voice, addressing him anew, "you have encumbered yourself with a difficult and curious charge. Permit me to while the time away for you with a pleasant tale. Now, once upon a time, there were 3 young Brahmins who lived a number of years in the home of their spiritual teacher. All 3 had fallen in love with their teacher's daughter, and he did not dare to bestow her on any one of them for fear of breaking the others' hearts. But then the maid was stricken with a serious illness and died, and the 3 young men, equally desperate, committed her body to a funerary pyre. When it had been cremated, the first decided to give vent to his grief by wandering through the world as a beggar ascetic. The second gathered the beloved bones from among the ashes and proceeded with them to a celebrated sanctuary beside the life-giving waters of the holy Ganges, while the third, remaining on the spot, constructed a hermit's hut over the place of the fire and slept on the ashes of the body of his love. Now the one who had decided to roam through the world was one day the witness of an extraordinary event. He saw a man read from a book of magic charm that restored a child to life whose body had already been consumed to ashes. Stealing the book, the young lover hurried back to the cremation scene and arrived just when the one who had gone to the Ganges also returned, the latter having dipped the bones into the life-giving stream. The skeleton was reassembled among the ashes, the charm was read from the book, and the miracle came to pass. The thrice-beloved arose again, more beautiful than ever. So at once the rivalry was resumed, but more hotly now, for each claimed to have earned the right to her, one having guarded her ashes, one having dipped her bones in the Ganges, and the third having pronounced the spell. "And so to whom does she belong?" said the voice in the corpse. "If you know the answer but do not reply, your head will explode." The king believed he knew, and so was forced to reply. "The one who recalled her to life, the magic spell, and had little trouble in doing so is her father," he said, "and the one who rendered the pious service to her bones fulfilled the duty of a son. but the one who slept on the ashes, did not depart from her, and devoted his life to her, may be termed her spouse. A wise enough judgment, yet the moment it was given, the corpse was gone. Doggedly, the king returned, cut it down, and started again their unrewarding walk. The voice resumed. The king was given another riddle to solve, and again compelled to retrace his path. And so it went, time after time, the unrelenting spectre in the corpse, spinning tale upon tale of twisted destinies and tangled lives, while the king was driven to and fro. All of life with its joys and horrors was described, and the threads of the fantasies always twisted into knots of right and wrong, tangles of conflicting claims. There was a story, for example, of the posthumous son of a thief who was faced by a delicate problem when he went to make an offering to his dead father at a sacred well. His grandmother had been left a widow while still very young, and since her relatives had defrauded her of the inheritance, she had been compelled to go out into the world with only her little daughter. The night of her departure from the village, she came upon a thief who had been impaled and was on the verge of death. In terrible agony, hardly able to breathe, he expressed a desire to marry the little daughter, then and there, with the thought that the marriage would give him spiritual rights over her future son, even though the latter should be engendered by another, and this son then would be eligible to make the offerings due to the soul of a deceased father. In compensation, he would tell where he had concealed a certain stolen treasure. The marriage was concluded in an informal though binding manner. The thief died, and the mother and daughter had considerable fortune. The girl fell in love, in due time, with a handsome young Brahmin, and he consented to become her lover, but insisted on a payment, because there was a certain courtesan whose fee he wished to be able to pay. The young woman conceived a son, and following the instructions of a dream, deposited the baby, together with 1,000 gold pieces, at the threshold of the palace of a certain king. Now this king, who was without offspring and desirous of an heir to the throne, had happened that very night to dream that a child was about to be deposited at his door. He accepted the sign, and brought up the foundling as his son and heir. Many years later, when the benevolent king had died, the young prince, incumbent to the throne, went to make an offering to his departed father. He proceeded to a holy well where the dead were accustomed to stretch forth their hands to receive the proffered gifts, but instead of a single hand, 3 hands appeared to take his oblation, that of the impaled thief, that of the Brahmin, and that of the king. The prince did not know what to do. Even the priests attending the offering were at a loss. Well, challenged the spectre in the corpse, into which hand should the prince consign his oblation? Again threatened with the explosion of his skull, the king pronounced judgment. The oblation should be placed in the hand of the thief, for neither the Brahmin who begot the child nor the king who reared him has any valid claim. The Brahmin sold himself. The king received his compensation in the gold pieces. The man who made it possible for the prince to be born was the thief. His treasure paid for both the begetting and the fosterage. Furthermore, the thief had title to the child by marriage. Immediately the corpse was off, and still another walk brought the king back to the tree. Then there's that curious tale of the transposed heads, the tale of 2 lifelong friends and a girl. The maid married one of the 2, but the marriage was not particularly happy. Shortly following the wedding, the couple, together with their bachelor friend, set forth on a visit to the parents of the bride. On the way, they came to a sanctuary of the bloodthirsty goddess Kali, and the husband excused himself for a moment to go into the temple alone. There, in a sudden excess of emotion, he decided to offer himself to the image as a sacrifice, and with a keen-edged sacrificial sword that was there, lopped his head from his shoulders and collapsed in a pool of blood. The friend, having waited with the bride, went into the temple to see what had happened, and when he beheld the sight, was inspired to follow suit. At last the bride came in, only to take flight again, intent on hanging herself from the limb of a tree. The voice of the goddess commanded her to halt, however, and sent her back to restore the lives of the 2 young men by replacing the heads. But because of her distraction, the young woman made the interesting mistake of putting the friend's head on the husband's body and the husband's on the friend's. To which now does she belong? Demanded the spectre in the corpse. The one with the husband's body or the one with the husband's head? The king thinks he knows, and to keep his own head from bursting, gives his answer. The one with the husband's head, for the head ranks supreme among the members, just as woman among life's delights. Again the corpse has vanished, and again the king is trudging back to the fateful tree. When will the ordeal end? Is it some kind of serious test or a joke? In all, 24 riddles are propounded, and the king can announce a solution to all but the last. This last concerns the case of a father and son. They were members of a hill tribe of huntsmen, the father a chief, and the two had gone out on a hunting party when they happened on the footprints of two women. Now the father was a widower, and the son as yet unmarried, but the father in his sorrow for his deceased wife had rejected every suggestion that he should rewed. Still, the footmarks were particularly charming. The practiced eyes of the hunters judged that they had been left by a noble mother and daughter, fugitives of some aristocratic house, perhaps even a queen and a princess. The larger prints suggested the beauty of the queen, and the smaller ones the fascination of the princess. The son was very much excited, but the father had to be persuaded. What the son proposed was that the father should marry the woman of the larger footprints and himself the smaller, as befitted their rank and age. He had to argue the point for some time, but at last the chieftain acquiesced, and the two took a solemn oath that that was the way it should be. Then they made haste along the trail, and they came at length upon the two unhappy creatures, a queen and princess indeed, just as the tribesmen had suspected, in anxious flight from a situation that had developed at home when the king had unexpectedly died. But there was this disillusioning complication. The daughter was the one who had the larger feet. According to their oath, therefore, the son would be forced to marry the queen. Father and son conducted their quarry into their mountain village, and there made wives of them. The daughter became the wife of the chief and the mother of the son. Then the two women conceived. Now just how were the two male children that were born related to each other? Asked the voice of the spectre in the corpse. Precisely what was each to the other, and precisely what were they not? The king, carrying his burden, was unable to find any unequivocal term for this complicated relationship. The enigma had at last been found that could strike him dumb, and so he walked along with a remarkably buoyant stride, bemusing the problem in silence. The children would be living paradoxes of interrelationship, both this and that, uncle and nephew, nephew and uncle, at once on the father's side and on the mother's. But is it not always so, with all things, in some secret respect? Is not everything in some deep way its own opposite? Even though the discriminating intellect, the categorizing logic of human language and thought, may refuse to accept the paradoxical fact, nevertheless every feature, every moment of life includes somehow qualities diametrically opposed to those apparently implied. In the kingly person there can lie concealed a secret unkingliness, a streak of inadvertence, for example, which may lead on occasion to the inadequate supervision of possibly dangerous strangers, or perhaps a tendency to underestimate gifts that arrived in humble wrappings. Similarly, unholiness can reside beneath the robe of a religious mendicant. Having seemingly renounced the world of power and ambition, the beggar monk can be addicted, nevertheless, to black magic, and devote his nights to the sinister practices of necromancy. Have we here hit upon the hidden lesson of this wild symposium of the 24 tales of the spectre and the corpse? Is this the meaning of the bizarre initiation? Was the king wiser in his silence than in the perspicacity of his replies? Driven back into the problem of his own character and present predicament, he walked in silence, but with an admirable nimbleness of step that seemed heedless of the night's long ordeal. And apparently the spectre was impressed, for when the voice spoke again, it was altered to a tone of respect. "Sir," it said, "you seem cheerful in spite of all this weird tramping back and forth across the funeral ground. You are unafraid. I am pleased by the spectacle of your determination. You may have this corpse, therefore. Take it with you. I am about to quit it." But this was not the end. If it were, the adventure would have been of little avail, a test of valor perhaps, but more like a practical joke, or the whole affair of the burning ground and the spectre and the corpse would have amounted to little better than a macabre literary device for the framing of a number of unrelated tales. The collection is witty and entertaining, but at the same time portentous and profound. This king and his spectre are linked by a deeply hidden enigma of the soul. Before taking his departure, the voice warned that the projects of the magician ascetic were of terrible danger to them both. Beneath the holy garment of renunciation throbbed a boundless lust for power and blood. The necromancer was about to use the king in a great enterprise of black magic, first as accomplice, and then as a living human sacrifice. "Listen, O king," the spectre warned. "Listen to what I have to tell you, and if you value your own good, do exactly as I say. That beggar monk is a very dangerous impostor. With his powerful spells, he is going to force me to re-enter this corpse, which he will then use as an idol. What he plans to do is to place it in the center of his magic circle, worship me there as a divinity, and, in the course of the worship, offer you up as the victim. You will be ordered to fall down and do me reverence, first on your knees, then prostrate, in the most slavish attitude of devotion, with your head, hands, and shoulders touching the ground. He will attempt then to decapitate you with a single stroke of your own sword. There is only one way to escape. When you are ordered to go down, you must say, "Please demonstrate this slavish form of prostration so that I, a king unused to such attitudes, may see how one assumes such a posture of worship." And when he is lying flat on the ground, strike off his head with a quick cut of the sword. In that instant, all the supernatural power that this sorcerer is trying to conjure from the sphere of the celestials will fall to you, and you will be a potent king indeed. The spectre, with that, departed, and the king proceeded freely on his way. The magician betrayed no impatience at having been forced to wait, but on the contrary seemed filled with admiration that the task should have been accomplished at all. He had used the time to complete the ritual arrangement of his magic circle. It was all marked out with a hideous material gathered from the immediate neighborhood, a kind of paste composed of the whitish meal of ground bones mixed with the blood of dead bodies, and the area was unpleasantly alight with the flickering of wicks burning with corpse fat. The sorcerer lifted the burden from the king's shoulder, washed it, and decorated it with garlands, as though it were a sacred image, then set it in the center of the magic circle. He summoned the spectre by means of a series of potent incantations and compelled it to enter into the prepared body. Then he undertook to pay it worship after the manner of a priest, paying worship to a divinity which has been invited to take up residence within a sacred image as an august guest. The time came, presently, for him to make the king go down, first on his knees, then on his face. But when he pronounced the command, his noble acolyte required to be shown how to take the posture. So the terrible monk got down on his knees. The king watched and waited. The monk fell forward, pressing his hands, shoulders, and face to the ground, and with a quick slash, the king struck off his head. The blood gushed. The king rolled the body over, and with another expert blow split the chest. He ripped the heart out and offered it up, together with the head, as an oblation to the spectre in the corpse. Then a mighty sound of jubilation arose out of the night, and from every side, from the host of surrounding spirits, souls, and ghouls, lifting a tumult of acclaim to the victor. By his deed, he had redeemed the supernatural powers from the threat of the necromancer, who had been on the very point of reducing them all to slavery and enchantment. The spectre in the corpse lifted its uncanny voice, but now in joy and praise. What the necromancer sought was absolute power over souls and ghouls, it said, and over all the spiritual presences of the supernatural domain. That power now shall be yours, O king, when your life on earth is ended. Dominion over the whole earth, meanwhile, is to be given you. I have tormented you. I shall therefore now make atonement. What do you wish? Announce your desire, and it shall be granted. The king asked, in compensation for his toils during the strangest of all the nights he had ever known, that the 24 riddle tales told him by the spectre, together with the story of the night itself, should be made known over the whole earth and remain eternally famous among men. The spectre promised. And furthermore, the voice stated, not only shall the 25 tales be universally celebrated, but even Shiva, the great god, overlord of all the spectres and demons, the master ascetic of the gods, will himself do them honor. Neither ghosts nor demons shall have any power, whenever and wherever these tales are told, and whoever recites with sincere devotion even a single one of them shall be free from sin. With this great promise, the spectre abruptly departed, and immediately Shiva, the Lord of the universe, appeared in glory, attended by a multitude of gods. He gave greeting to the king and serenely thanked him with high praise for his deliverance of the powers of the spirit world from the impure hands of the aspiring ascetic. The divinity declared that the cosmic powers now were placed in the service of the king in return for his having prevented their misuse by the black magician who had been working for universal dominion, that the king would come into full possession of them at the close of his earthly career, and that during his lifetime he would govern the earth. Shiva bestowed upon him with his own hand the divine sword Invincible, which should give him the sovereignty of the world, and then he lifted the veil of ignorance that had been concealing from his consciousness the immortal essence of his human life. Blessed with this illumination, the king was free to take his leave of the gruesome proving ground. The dawn was breaking as he returned into the spacious halls of his lordly palace, like someone awakening from a night of troubled sleep. The tales of the spectre and the corpse had been like a succession of tortured dreams, seemingly endless, yet comprised in a comparatively brief period of time. And the victim, caught in the interminable sequence, walking to and fro across the burning ground, across the scene of bygone life, had been like a sleeper tossing restlessly in his bed. And just as one may discover on awakening that what had been obscure the day before now is understood, and was very much more intricate and profound in its obscurity than one had supposed, as obscure as the riddle of life itself, so this king came from his night of experience full of knowledge and transformed. During the following years, the miraculous fulfillment of the splendor promised came to pass, and his earthly life was enlarged in virtue and glory.